Hello everyone. In this video, I want to introduce you to the UI Storyboard Segway class in iOS and Swift. So far, we've been making iOS apps that have only had a single screen. And while we can make really interesting apps that only have a single screen, most apps have more than one screen. So in order to start working with multiple screens, we're going to have to start working with Segways in Interface Builder and in our Swift code. I find that sometimes people are a little unsure about how to pronounce Segway, or if they see it spelled out, it's not spelled out the way that they would think it would be spelled out. Perhaps I think it should be spelled out more like the Segway scooters that you can see over here. So let's start with the definition of Segway. So this is just straight from Google. As a verb, it means to move without interruption from one piece of music or scene to another. And as a noun, it means an uninterrupted transition from one piece of music or film scene to another. All right, so you know Apple, right? They're all into the aesthetics and the details, so it makes sense for them to name their transition from one screen to another in iOS a segue. So that's all it is. It's just a transition that's done smoothly. All right, so let's get over to Xcode and start our Segway Fun project. So Segway Fun is going to be a single view iOS app. It's going to be called Segway Fun. Make sure the language is Swift and the user interface is Storyboard. You can leave these boxes unchecked. Choose a place to store your project. All right, let's start in Viewcontroller.Swift. So Viewcontroller.Swift is the default view controller that we've been working with so far. We know that this view controller file, this class, is in some way connected to main.storyboard because we've been making UI views in Interface Builder with our storyboard and then using connections like IB actions or IB outlets to wire up those UI views to the code in Viewcontroller.Swift. So now it's going to become really apparent how these two are connected, the view controller class in Swift and the view controller view in main.storyboard. All right, so let's start by first changing the view for our view controller or the background for our view to be a different color than white, because if we're going to start adding multiple screens, it'll be very easy for us to figure out which screen we're currently working in if they have different background colors. So go ahead and just click on your view controller just in the center here, or click the view of the view controller in the attributes inspector over on the right-hand utilities panel. You can choose the background color and choose a different color. So I like this system teal color, so I'll choose this one. Okay, so we've got this blue view controller. And if we have multiple view controllers, we might want to change the name of our view controller from the general view controller to a more specific name. So let's do that. I'm going to show you how this view controller in Storyboard is connected to this viewcontroller.swift file. So still with my view controller selected, I can go over to the identity inspector. Okay, so I'm going to click view controller. Right at the top here, go to the identity inspector, and then under custom class, there's class, and it has the name of the associated Swift class for this view controller, okay? And this is a subclass of UI view controller. That's how this all works. So let's say I want to change the name of view controller to something a little bit more informative. So I'm going to hold command on my keyboard and then click on view controller and choose rename. This is going to be a safe rename such that every connection, everything in Storyboard, everything throughout our project will be appropriately changed from view controller to, let's say, blue view controller. Okay, so look, our file name updated to blue viewcontroller.swift. Main.storyboard also changed. If we click again on our view controller, the class is now blue view controller. All right, so far so good. Now let's add our second view controller, our second screen. Remember, one screen is equal to one view controller. Okay, there's a one-to-one mapping there. So let's go up to the library and search for a view controller. Here's our view controller. I'm gonna drag this out kind of to the right of my blue view controller. This will be our second screen. Okay, we're gonna start with the blue screen. That's what this arrow here means. This is our initial view controller. Okay, so we're gonna kind of read our storyboard from left to right. We'll start with the blue one, and then we're gonna transition from the blue one to this second one, which I think I would like to have maybe a nice, bright, let's do a pink background. All right, so far so good. Now we need to make a Swift file for a view controller or a subclass of UI view controller that's associated with this pink view controller. So let's go over to the Segway fun group and then do right-click, new file. We want a new Cocoa Touch class. Let's call this pink view controller. Subclass of, you may need to choose from a dropdown UI view controller if it's not the default. So make sure, this is really important, this is UI view controller. No need to check this box. We'll leave the language as Swift. All right, so now I've got my pink viewcontroller.swift file over here. Just because I've made this file and I happen to have a pink view controller in main.storyboard doesn't mean that this view controller and storyboard is actually connected to this Swift file. Like our blue view controller here is actually connected to the blue viewcontroller.swift file. All right, so let's click on our pink view controller, go up to the view controller icon, go to the identity inspector, and then under class, let's start to type pink view controller. Look, Xcode knows about the UI view controller subclass called pink view controller. Press enter. Now these two are connected. If I were to say wire up any UI views with say IB actions or IB outlets via this icon, pink view controller, we're going to be referring to pink view controller, the class, in pink view controller.swift. All right, so this is great. We've got two screens now. Each has its own view controller, but we can't get from our blue view controller to our pink view controller. If I run this now, I'll see the blue view controller, but like I said, we won't see the pink view controller because we haven't added a segue or a transition from the blue view controller to the pink view controller. So now we have two screens, and each one of our screens is associated with a view controller class, which is a subclass of UI view controller. What we want to do is add a UI view for the user to interact with on our blue screen that will segue when interacted with to our pink screen. So let's do that. Let's add a button. I'll zoom in here. Let's call this button, or set the text of this button to be go to pink view controller. Be very specific about what it does. And I am going to change the color of the text on this button because it's a little hard to see on my blue background here. So let's do perhaps black. It's a little better. All right, let's click on our button here and let's add auto layout constraint so that it's always going to be centered in the screen no matter what phone screen it's on. So I'm going to come down here to the align button, click it, and I'm going to say align horizontally in container and align vertically in container. All right, great. So even though we're working with an iPhone 11 here in Interface Builder, when I run this on the iPhone SE 2nd Gen simulator, it's still going to be centered and it's not going to look wonky. Okay, great. Now, when the user clicks this button, we want to bring them to our pink screen. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to hold Control and we're going to click on our button on our blue screen and we're going to drag over to anywhere in the middle of our pink screen and we're going to let go. And it's going to say, well, what kind of segue do you want? How do you want to transition when this button is clicked from your blue view controller to your pink view controller? And let's just click Show. All right, now you see this little arrow here. this little arrow is showing that we have our first Segway. Okay, you can kind of see the icon there. It's showing that when this Segway executes, this view controller on the right, the pink one, is going to go over the top of this blue controller, or this blue view controller on the left here. All right, so let's run it. All right, so here's our little app here. Go to pink view controller, the button is centered, I click it, and look at that. Our second view controller, the pink one, is shown on top of our blue one. Awesome, this is great. Although we have no way to get back to the blue view controller right now. Let's fix that. So I'm gonna go over to blue view controller, and I'm going to define a method here that's going to be an IB action, and it's going to be a method that executes when we want to unwind from our Segway. So I'm going to write IB action function unwind to blue view controller VC. This is going to accept a Segway of type UI storyboard Segway. And I don't really need to do anything in here unless I have some data that perhaps I want to receive from my pink view controller to my blue view controller. But just so we can see what's going on, I'm going to print out unwinding to the blue view controller. Okay, remember, just because I define an action, an IB action in my Swift file, doesn't mean it's wired up to anything. So what I want to do is I want to wire up a button in my pink screen that when they click it is going to cause our unwind Segway to execute, which will exit this pink screen and bring us back to the blue screen, and we will have this unwind to blue view controller method execute. That's the goal. All right, so let's do it. I'm going to add a button here. My text is going to be real simple. It's going to say unwind to blue view controller. Okay, same thing. I want to add some auto layout constraints, so this is centered no matter what screen we're on. Now, here's the key part. We're going to click on this button and, holding control, drag from the button up to not the view controller, not the first responder, but the exit, which is the last icon here. Okay, so when I drag up to the exit, it's going to say action Segway, unwind to blue view controller with Segway. This is the method that we define inside a blue view controller that we want to execute when the user wants to exit the pink screen and go back to the blue screen. Okay, it's an unwind Segway. Go back to a Segway, or undo a Segway transition and go back to an initiating or an instigating view controller. So I'm going to click unwind to blue view controller. Okay, and you can see now I've got this unwind Segway showing up over here under my pink view controller scene. And let me just zoom in a little bit here. Okay, if you hover over that third icon, you see it says exit. Okay, so how do you exit this view controller? You exit it with an unwind Segway. While we're here, let's also expand our blue view controller scene, and you can see it says show Segway to pink view controller. So you can always click to see your Segways, which one is which, and if you need to change any of the attributes, you can do so by clicking on the Segway and then going over to the attributes inspector. Like, for example, it's good practice to put an identifier on each one of your Segways for a few reasons. One is you might have multiple Segways that initiate, say, from your blue view controller to other view controllers, not just the pink view controller. Maybe you have like an orange view controller and a green view controller. So it's nice to identify them so that in code, if you need to pass in some data to those other view controllers, you can, based on which view controller is going to be shown next. All right, so this looks good. Let's run it. All right, so it says go to pink view controller. I click, fantastic. I'm in the pink view controller. I can just see the blue view controller behind it. I click unwind to blue view controller, and I'm back to the blue view controller, and I can flip back and forth very easily. Every time I press the unwind to blue view controller button, look down here at our output, we see that that IB action, that method we defined in the blue view controller class, is executing, unwinding, unwinding, unwinding. Okay, that's this print statement right here. So next steps when working with Segways include passing data into the next view controller and perhaps receiving a result or sending data back from that view controller to the instigating view controller. So for example, perhaps I have some user data here. Maybe I'm getting their username and their password, and then I click login and I want to pass that information to a second screen, like kind of like maybe their home page or their dashboard if they successfully authenticate, right? And then maybe here they're going to provide some values, maybe download something, whatnot, change their profile image or something, and then we need to send that data back to the initial view controller. We can do that. So that'll be a topic of a future video. This is just the basics for now, working with a single Segway and unwinding from that Segway, not passing any data in or out. The second topic that I would recommend for continuing your study of Segways would be looking into manual Segways. So what we've done here is called an automatic Segway because we've set it up exclusively in Interface Builder. Now, we can set up a Segway in Interface Builder, but not have it be tied specifically to a button like this. And we can instead trigger that Segway programmatically in code. So that would be called a manual Segway. So this here is an automatic Segway because in our blue Viewcontroller.Swift, we don't have any code to essentially fire off that Segway. But with a manual Segway, we can write code, perhaps when some condition is true in the code, to fire or trigger that Segway. Okay, so that would be my advice for the two next things to look into related to Segways. The first is related to automatic versus manual Segways, and the second is related to passing data into a second view controller and then sending data back from that second view controller to the initiating view controller. All right, that's it for the start of Segway fun. Thanks for watching.